Hello and good evening. Welcome to BRITPAC Live. BRITPAC, the new idea that we are doing to build a coalition, a consensus across the centre-right and right of British politics, bringing debate, discussion and the exchange of ideas together in one forum, but outside the framework of party politics. This evening we're going to be discussing the United States presidential election. An election that's going to have an impact not only on the United States, but us here in the UK, particularly in the context of Brexit, but also it's going to impact the rest of the world. We've got a resurgent China, we've got terrorism, as we've only too recently realised, that is still out there. This election is going to have a major impact on what is going on in our future lives. So, we will be talking now about the US electoral system. We will be talking about the polling that has been conducted and what that tells us about how the election might play out tonight. Later on we will be joined by three guests. We will be joined firstly by Robert Oles, Director of the Bruges Group. We will then be joined by Caesar and Max from the University of Tennessee, and then lastly David Maddox, the Sunday Express political editor, will join us to give his insights, particularly on polling and the likely outcomes of the election. So, from Joe and myself, we hope you enjoy it, we hope you have a good evening, and I hope this is informative. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, let us now look at how the US electoral system actually works. What is the Electoral College and why is it important in this particular election? In fact, in any presidential election in the United States. We're also going to look at why it is that the occupant of the White House is not the only person we need to be concerned about today. In addition to an election for the President of the United States, this is an election for Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate. Now I'm going to mention only the Senate this evening. The Senate consists of 100 senators, 2 for every state in the United States. And this is relevant because up until now, the President of the United States for the last 4 years, Donald Trump, has been a Republican. And the Senate is also controlled by the Republican Party. So it is reasonably easy for a Republican president, for example, to get legislation through the Senate, through Congress, if he's got control also of the Senate. But it is also quite possible that following this election we will have a Senate controlled by a different party to that of the White House. So the President may be one party, Democrat or Republican, and the Senate may be the other. And in this particular election, the polls are showing that it's very close, and indeed the Republicans may lose control of the Senate. So we may end up with Donald Trump in for a second 4-year term, but not being able to drive legislation through as easily as he has done in the last 4 years, less easy to achieve things because he doesn't necessarily have control of the Senate. So whilst we are primarily interested in the presidential race, we're also interested in the outcome of what will go on in the Senate going forward. Now what I want to talk about now is the Electoral College. The United States has a rather interesting, I'm going to say archaic, way of conducting its presidential elections. Now you can imagine going back in the day, before telegraph, before telephones, before emails or any such thing as that, then it was quite difficult to conduct an election across the entire territory of the United States, because bringing all those numbers into the middle to count them all together would have been very, very difficult. So actually, the United States Constitution allows for a system that means that every state conducts within the constitutional framework the election according to a large extent its own administration. And rather like here in the United Kingdom we have the devolved administrations in Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, likewise in the United States, American states have the power to legislate, to pass law. And a lot of that legislation does apply to the way that they conduct in their own states the presidential elections. What happens then, back in the day, remember we've got no communications when all this started, when this was set up under the US Constitution, what would happen is that a state, for example, let's take California over here. California is a very populous state, and because it's so big, it has 55 electors. And so whichever way the state goes, whether it goes Republican or whether it goes Democrat, those 55 electors who give electoral weight to the state of California, those 55 electors are their representatives in the Electoral College. But if you go to Montana up here, similar sized state perhaps, but with far fewer people living there. So Montana only has 3 representatives in the Electoral College. So whilst California is one state, if it goes Democrat, the Democrats get 55 votes out in the Electoral College. Montana, if it goes Democrat, they only get 3 votes out of Montana. So you can see that actually some states are more important to win for a presidential nominee candidate than the others, because California obviously has more weight in that Electoral College. And it's the same for every state in the United States. They all have different numbers. And you can see on this map, there are numbers apportioned to every state. And they will, if their state goes a particular way, they, back in the day, would then go to a meeting, congressional meeting, and they would vote in that meeting in accordance with the way the state went. It's not proportional representation. It is winner takes all. So even if, in California, a party, let's say the Democrats, got only 51% of the votes, they would get all 55 votes in the Electoral College. And that is why there's a magic figure of 270, because all of these numbers around the United States in the Electoral College add up to 540. And whichever candidate manages to get past 270 votes in the Electoral College is the candidate who is going to win the election. So that is how the Electoral College system works. And it's important because it's important to know that there are certain states that carry a lot of weight. For example, California compared to those such as Montana. Now, in 2016, the presidential election result looked like this. So the states in red were those states won by the Republican Party, by their candidate, their nominated candidate for the presidency, Donald Trump. The ones in blue, they represent states that were won by the Democrats. They were won by Democrats, but they did not accrue sufficient electoral college votes to be able to defeat Donald Trump and the Republicans. So the numbers in these boxes, in the blue boxes, did not add up to the total number of the boxes in red. Interestingly, 2016, although they won the electoral college votes, the Republicans did not win the popular vote. So there were more people across the United States that voted for Hillary Clinton as the Democratic Party nominee for the presidency than there were for the Republican nominee, Donald Trump. But Trump won more states, and in winning more states, he was able to deploy more votes in the Electoral College. So he won the election. Now, if we look at the poll of polls for this election coming, for today's election, then this is what it looks like. The states in dark blue, those are the states that are almost certainly going to vote for the Democrats, for Joe Biden. Those in dark red, for example, the states down here, these are all states that are going to vote almost certainly for the Republican nominee, Donald Trump, for a second term in the White House for 4 years. The paler red, the less likely that state is to vote Republican. But it's still red, it's pink, and it's moving into the red spectrum, and therefore it is likely to go towards the Republicans and Donald Trump. The lighter blue states, for example, up here in the northeast, those are more likely to, or they are leaning towards the Democrat nominee, Joe Biden. Now what we've done is we've tidied that up. So actually the light blue states, which it's a winner-take-all situation, so even if you only just win a state, then you get all of the electoral college votes from that state. So what we've done is we've tidied it up so you can see it more clearly. The states in blue here are the ones that the poll of polls, now there are some exceptions to this, which we'll come to, but the poll of polls says that the states in dark blue on this map are the states that are most likely to go, or almost certainly going to go Democrat, Joe Biden. The ones in red, however, all these ones here, these are more likely to go towards Donald Trump and the Republicans. Now if we add all that up on the poll of polls, the average polling across the United States, then that brings us to 163 electoral college votes for Donald Trump, 287 for Joe Biden, and then if you look up here, 85 are in play because the states that are, for example, down here in Florida, where's Florida? Florida's down here. The states such as Florida, they are swing states according to the poll of polls, the average polling. There are a lot of polling companies out there doing a lot of polling, and this is the collation of all of those results. So that these states in gold down here, those are states that are swing states. They could go either way, according to the poll of polls. So it's 85 electoral college votes up for grabs in those states, such as Florida, such as Georgia, and just above Florida there. That means that even if Donald Trump and the Republicans win all those swing states, according to the poll of polls, Donald Trump still cannot bring together enough votes in the Electoral College to reach that magic number of 270, and therefore he is not going to win. Joe Biden, on the other hand, is already over that line, 287 Electoral College votes. Joe Biden, according to the poll of polls, is on course to win the 2020 presidential election race. Now let's just, for comparative sake, let's look at the 2016 results here behind me over my right shoulder, and then we've got the poll of polls prediction here on my left. Now, you will see that they are very similar. It's much the same sort of states. You'll see that there are some differences, but that's just really an interesting comparison. I'm just going to step to the side here so you can maybe see it a little bit more clearly. Just for interest, but you'll see again that we've got the states of Florida, Georgia just above it, and so on, that are really swing states there, and they're up for playing. But we're still on course for a Biden win. That said, if we look at this map, well, this map is the 2020, what I've called the alternative prediction. Because those polling agencies that have gone out there and done all of that previous polling that I showed you, they have gone to all registered voters and they have asked what those registered voters would vote in the election. Some polling companies, and we will talk about this later in the program with David Maddox from the Sunday Express, some polling companies have asked the question in a different way. And that gives us a different result. According to this alternative polling, in fact, we've got the Democrats not on 287 as before, but on 231 electoral college votes. And yet we've got Donald Trump on 272 electoral college votes and 32 up for grabs. So in this scenario, we are on course for a Republican Donald Trump win and 4 more years for Donald Trump in the White House. So that's where we are, ladies and gentlemen, and these are what we're going to talk about. This is what we're going to talk about earlier. Plus, why is it that some people are indicating in some polls that they won't, or that they're voting for for Joe Biden, and they're comfortable to do so? Other people seem very reluctant to talk about the fact that they're going to vote for Trump and the Republican Party. Why is that? We're going to be talking to Robert Olds later in the program, who is going to talk about that particular issue. Also, we've got to bear in mind that this election is going to be close. These polling results are telling you, really, that it depends how you look at it, It could be a Biden win or it could be a Trump win. It is going to be close. Now, both candidates have said that because it's likely to be close, they are not going to informally concede defeat. They are going to wait until later. Now, why is that? Not only because it's close, but because we have seen a record turnout of early votes in the election, and we don't know what that means yet. It's very difficult to tell. Both Republicans and Democrats will claim it's in their favour, but for example, we're going to speak to some people from the University of Tennessee later in the programme, but in Tennessee, they have had a record turnout. They've had as many people vote early, because unlike the UK where you can vote on polling day only, in the United States, in many states, you can turn up early, as much as a month in advance or so, and you can cast your vote at the polling station. Now, Tennessee has had more people voting early than they had voted this year, than they had voted in the entire election in 2016. What's going on? We don't really understand that. But we'll talk about that later on. But in addition, there has been a very high demand for postal votes, for absentee votes. So people voting by post, as you can in this country. But there are some states, such as Wisconsin, for example, where actually they will even accept your vote by post even if it doesn't arrive on time. Some 4 days later is acceptable to them. So in these postal votes, we may, and plus because there has been such a demand for them, the American Postal Service has said it's not sure that it's going to be able to deliver all these votes on time. So we may end up with a very high proportion of the votes cast in this election actually not being there to count on election night, tonight. It may take some days for that to happen. And if it's close in every other respect around the United States, those postal votes may hold the key to the White House and the next 4-year presidency. And for that reason, because it's close, because of those postal votes, it is quite likely that we will not see a winner or a loser tonight when those results have come in by the morning. We will be waiting for the postal votes to be counted. Now, we don't know how long that's going to take. We may indeed, there may be a dramatic shift on the ground, and we may indeed see somebody clearly getting over the line later tonight. But it's far more likely that this is going to drag on for some days. And then, are we going to see a legal battle? Are we going to see the result actually challenged by one or other candidate? And if that happens, where does it go? It goes to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court will have a large say in that. And that, for those of you who have been watching the news recently, there's been a little bit of a storm about the appointment of a Supreme Court judge recently, and by the Republicans, by President Trump. The Democrats also wanted him to wait until after the election. It is because that appointment gives the Republicans because they're political appointees in the Supreme Court, gives them weight in the Supreme Court, and perhaps it gives them an advantage if they want to contest the outcome. So, it's all to play for. We're going to talk about it later on. David Maddox, in terms of polling, will be a very interesting man to listen to in tonight's programme. And again, the dynamics of how people say they're going to vote compared to how they're going to vote is something that we'll be speaking to Robert Olds from the Bruce Group about.
So it is incredibly important that we understand the Electoral College and the impact that has in terms of the votes for the presidency. So that's the background to it. That's how the polls stand at the moment. We really don't know who's going to win this. Under a poll of polls, it looks as though Biden's likely to have the edge. However, the alternative polling that we'll talk about a great deal more about later with David Maddox in particular indicates that indeed Trump, even in the poll of polls, who's been moving forward, is going to edge it. So we'll see. However, there are also other things that are going to affect this election, including the run-up to it during the campaign, the role of social media, and the role of certain aspects of the way that society, both in the United States and the UK, is going at the moment. So I'm incredibly pleased now to be able to welcome Robert Olds. Robert is the director of the Bruges Group. Robert is also the author of a book called Moralitas, a Cultural Virus, which I think he's going to talk about in a moment. But the Bruges Group is a conservative group that has been arguing for the United Kingdom. It's a Eurosceptic group. I think that's probably the way that Robert would like it to be described. And he's not only incredibly well networked here in the United Kingdom, behind the scenes, but Robert is also uniquely positioned to grasp the extent to which the silent majority are actually intimidated and oppressed, one might say, in terms of politics and the democratic processes. It's important to understand this, and this is what we're going to talk to Robert about in a moment. And it's important to understand the negative impact it has on the democratic processes in the United States and here in Great Britain. So Robert, very pleased to meet you again. It's been a little while since we met, mainly because of the coronavirus lockdowns that we've had. There's now successive lockdowns. So good to have you on the show.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, you're very welcome, Robert. Can we start just by talking a little bit in general about the US election? I think most of the polls are saying that Biden is going to win. What's your take on that? What do you think?
I think it's almost certain that Trump is going to win for a number of reasons. According to the opinion polls, there is a lead for Biden. That is bogus for a number of reasons. There's other polls, other kind of evidence, which is more important than that, such as who the American public trust to manage the economy. Do they trust Trump more, or do they trust Biden more? Almost overwhelmingly, they trust Trump well to run the economy. Plus, of course, he has actually a positive approval rating. Now, people may not be admitting to wanting to vote Trump for various reasons, which I'll get to shortly. There's other evidence that in polling, that people will say they're going to vote Biden. But if they're asked, how do you think your neighbours will vote? They'll say Trump. Really, there is a groundswell of opinion for President Donald Trump to get 4 more years. And the polls don't reflect this for one reason. Some people are embarrassed to admit that they're going to be voting for Donald Trump. Other people just cannot be bothered arguing with people. It's a bit like admitting to be a Brexiteer. Over here, you're going to have somebody bending your ear. You're going to have someone making accusations against you. So even if you are a proud supporter of Donald Trump, not embarrassed at all, you still won't necessarily admit to it because you just know that someone's going to be shouting at you and yelling at you, calling you all manner of names. And there's also a significant proportion of the American population who are actually deeply afraid of admitting that they'll support Trump. Either for they may well then be subject to violence because it happens, but also some people are concerned about the deep state. And they've seen how the Democrats have been trying to gerrymander and manipulate the political process and the legal process, trying to impeach Donald Trump for things Joe Biden admitted doing, that we see a great deal of suspicion. And of course, a fourth reason is some people are just so disgusted with the swamp in the United States that they simply will not engage with pollsters. And those people will be voting for Donald Trump. So that is one really major factor. And because Donald Trump is more trusted on the economy, and because people are super enthused, we can really, I think, expect 4 more years of President Trump. So why don't the polls reflect this? Because one reason is the people commissioning the polls are, of course, doing so for the media outlets, which are completely sold out onto the Democrats' agenda and they want to really undermine America from within. That is actually a belief. And the polls for CNN are going to give the customer what they want to hear. And ridiculously, pollsters are presuming there's going to be a Biden lead because they think that Republican turnout will be low. That is preposterous because Americans are super energized, particularly Republicans and independents as well, for Donald Trump. So I really do expect that Donald Trump is going to win.
Oh, so you think the polls might be wrong, and you think that that's because people think there might be a social implication for saying that they support Trump?
Absolutely, yes. We see here people can lose their jobs if they say the right thing. Their career prospects will be harmed if, for instance, they come out as a Brexiteer or have conservative views, conservative small c on immigration. The same is in the United States as well. We have cancel culture. If you say the wrong thing in Britain or the United States, you can get the police knocking at your door, even for when they don't have the legal right to do so. We see cancel culture, cancelling speakers out. We see a prejudiced university system where people aren't really going to get educated, they're going to madrasas, essentially, in the United States and in the United Kingdom. And people have learnt to just keep their heads down, keep their mouths shut, a bit like living in a communist country where there was two kinds of truths. There was the truth which they would say publicly, where people would echo the party line and whatever the communist authorities were telling them to think, and privately, amongst their trusted friends and their family, they would have the real truth, where they would really give their views. And people have become accustomed to keeping quiet because of the severe prejudice that they will face, and sometimes even the force of law, if indeed people just speak their mind, because the left has always wanted to shut down free speech and rational debate, because facts don't help their cause, and they believe that feelings should triumph over people's facts, and evidence is not to be allowed if indeed it runs contrary to their agenda. And slowly they're trying to squeeze people out from public space and trying to squeeze the debate down, close the Overton window so that only voices on the left can be heard. And that's their agenda. They're aiming for a year zero in their cultural revolution. And do not underestimate the delusional state which they're in, and the tactics that they will use. And people pick up on this, and so people simply don't admit to supporting Donald Trump.
Really, Robert, what you're saying, I mean, earlier on I did a pre-recorded piece in which I was saying that the poll of polls in the US is really showing that Biden has really got the edge here. There are other polls which we'll be talking about later on the programme that show that Trump has got the edge, and we'll talk about the difference in how that polling was done. But really you're saying that the polling that's been done is unreliable because a lot of people are not going to give truthful or full answers to the pollsters who are asking the questions, and they're not going to even talk about it publicly amongst friends or in the local bar. I mean, I think that's what you're saying, is it not?
Yeah, that is one factor. Another factor is that the media want to have polls which show Biden winning. They're the customer. They want to see that. They want to be able to report that. They feel they get cultural benefits and economic benefits and kudos points if they can show something that's anti-Trump and pro-Biden. With actually, there's very little enthusiasm for Biden. Just anything that criticizes Trump is to be welcomed in those circumstances. So that's another factor. They just want to report bad news for the incumbent president. Another factor is also that in their minds are so closed that they can't possibly think that someone would vote for Trump, because all these polls, they have a whole load of data, and then people make assumptions about who is likely to turn out, who will be less likely to turn out. And they just think Republicans, surely they cannot vote for Donald Trump, because in their minds, they built him up to be some kind of ogre. They're fully sold out. They're fully engaged with the hysteria that surrounds the current left at the moment, and wokeness. And they can't just think that it's possible. So they presume there's going to be a low turnout of Republicans. That is simply preposterous. And a third factor is, as Donald Trump calls them, they're suppression polls. They're designed to try and motivate the Democrat base and disillusion Republicans, which isn't working. But they exaggerate that because they believe they are serving a righteous cause by being against Trump. So, once was the case that people would go into journalism because they wanted to write about news and events. Now they want to go in because they're waging some righteous woke crusade against people like you and I, and of course most ordinary people in the country. The same is true in the United States, and of course in the polling agencies as well. It's as if there's a virus which is infecting people and making them lose their minds, and making them become deeply intolerant. And again, don't mind manipulating data to suit their ends, such as in the Soviet Union, they would manipulate the evidence to show that actually their
I can see a gradual build into plugging your book, which I see the title behind you is Moralitis, a Cultural Virus. It's just over your left shoulder there. So no, agreed. And indeed, to reinforce, if I may, slightly something that you're saying about the media, on a different level, because perhaps what you're saying impacts not only in federal elections and so on in the United States, but also local elections, perhaps here. I was speaking to a local journalist, local newspaper, not so long ago. Actually, it was in the build-up to the last general election here in the UK, back in December. And he was telling me, well, look, there are certain stories that we can't run, and the reason is because there is a particular party that is in power at the moment locally, and our paper really survives on the advertising that we get from them. And therefore my editor is extremely cautious about saying anything that might in any way undermine them. So indeed, you know, whether that's pragmatic or whether it's political, there's an issue there. I mean, I know you have a lot of views on all of this.
Yeah, just a few, yeah.
I mean,
yeah. Well, how do you think that, like an organisation like Black Lives Matter, for example, do you think that they could have affected, because some people were saying, I think on social media, that they were anti-Trump, and actually after the Black Lives Matter protests and the riots and everything that happened there, they actually became pro-Trump after that.
Absolutely, yeah. The Black Lives Matter Incorporated, a £1 billion enterprise which is funding the Democrats and committing violence, and and political violence in Britain is what we call terrorism. So, along with Antifa, now labelled a terrorist organisation, that has actually helped Trump. And one of the ways in which it has helped is that it has galvanised the black vote behind Donald Trump. There is going to be an increase in Donald Trump's share of the vote. Yes, still will probably still vote Democrat, but there will be a significant turnout, because this is essentially an organisation run by white, what they would call liberals in America, or leftists as we would call them in Britain, who want to destabilise the American system of government, because they believe that it is somehow, well, in capitalist and the white capitalist patriarchy and delusional episodes, the left has tried to undermine free enterprise, private property, representative democracy, freedom of speech through inciting class conflict. Now they're trying to use the races or people's genders or sexualities or men and women against each other in their intersectionality. This is a campaign which has clear political goals. It is never about the rights of one such group. Most people don't identify as those groups anyway. They just want to get on with their lives and be prosperous. But Black Lives Matter has committed so much violence, particularly in what were predominantly black neighbourhoods or inner city neighbourhoods, where there were businesses, they have been burnt out. And it's all very good for the corporates who are funding them, who get the opportunity to virtue signal. Perhaps there's a bit of a protection racket going on as well, because it's mainly small short stores that are getting burned down. But I really do think that terrorism being on the streets of America will make people yearn for law and order and know.
Well, I was going to ask this exactly this, Robert. I mean, Black Lives Matter. We've seen the riots that have gone on in the US, and the protests here in the UK that haven't been anywhere near as violent or destructive as in the US. But the other day I took part in a debate, a college debate, and in that debate the proposition, I was rather surprised that even it came up as a proposition in a college debate, a formal college debate, was, is Black Lives Matter justified in the use of force? And there were a lot of people who were arguing that it was. And of course, Black Lives Matter in the UK is now registering as a political party, and the definition of terrorism broadly is to use violence or the threat of violence to achieve political aims. Well, that organisation is surely treading on dangerous ground there, as it is in the United States. But my question for you, Robert, in the wake of Black Lives Matter, and Joe highlighting this just now, and the violence used, has this played into the Trump campaign because Donald Trump, as we all know, is very tough on law and order. It's one of his big things, immigration and law and order. And of course, if we translate that back, to the public in the US or here, again, it's what you say. People, if they say, well, actually, maybe we should be managing our immigration slightly better or differently, then they are afraid that they are going to be called racists, or they are going to be in some way called Little Englanders, or whatever they may be. And so they don't express themselves with what actually is a very passive but legitimate concern. But how has this played into the Trump campaign, do you think, on law and order?
You use the term racist. The official definition of the word racist, it now means someone who wins an argument against someone on the left. That's what a racist is now. That's how you define it. But basically, this whole that's come from the Democrats, where they actually believe in their righteousness, because just like communists or socialists before, or any kind of collectivist before, they've always believed that they have the truth and their views must rule over others, and that they can do anything in those purposes. We know through history about how communism has killed literally hundreds of millions of people globally. It is the most oppressive ideology of the 20th century. And of course, the other forms of collectivism were Nazism and fascism as well, all of the left, essentially. But most people don't want to go along with those ideologies. People want just get on with their lives. But these 60s radicals who are now penetrated all the institutions and are running the political parties in the United but destabilizing. They want happy to commit violence. Yeah. If it serves their purposes. Of course, mostly...
Robert, I'm going to have to interrupt you. I'm going to have to interrupt you. Look, it's fascinating, and one of the things that I wanted to get on to, but we haven't had time to, unfortunately, unless you want to say a quick 30 seconds, 1 minute word on this, is the role of social media. And obviously, that's had a role to play in Black Lives Matter. And of course, all political campaigns, Democrat and Republican, have been employing social media broadly. We've advertised this event on social media. It's a fact of life. It's a primary means of communication. But, I don't know whether you've got, in relation again to your opinions and your incredibly interesting views on wokeness, whether you've got a view on the social media impact of this campaign as well, that's now culminating in today's election.
Well, according to the social media analysis and what's more active and very complex algorithms, Trump has actually more of a chance of winning the election. But the social media, the big tech companies are engaged in a suppression of free speech. They are operating hand in glove with the Democrats. They are trying to manipulate the news. They do already manipulate the news to try and get their agenda through. And they, of course, will present a face which is morally acceptable. They'll be claiming to have some kind of morally superiority. All the time, the big tech companies want to distract from the regulations which actually favour them and enable them to become monopolies, and to avoid the fact that they don't pay any meaningful tax. So they're engaged in a campaign of corporate distraction.
Robert, we're going to have to go, but the other thing about this that I would slot in here is that indeed people like Google, Twitter and so on, Facebook, actually, who are they really accountable to? Anyway, we'll leave that question there for now, but maybe...
They need to be broken up in antitrust legislation. They're monopolies.
It's a discussion that we could have in a subsequent programme. But Robert, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Robert.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Speak to you again soon. All right, now, so that was Robert Olds of the Bruges Group, conservative Eurosceptic group that has had a major role to play in bringing together conservative politicians, particularly in the UK, in cause of leaving the European Union, which of course we did earlier in the year. Now, I mean, I don't know, but I think, what Robert's saying there is absolutely crucial. If we've got a situation in democratic politics in which people do not feel free to express their opinion, yes, then what's that say for not only the polling before the election, but perhaps even the way people vote or are afraid to vote.
Yeah.
It's very difficult.
Yeah, well, you've got to remember also we've seen a huge turnout in these Trump rallies, actually, all across America. So, you know, it's 50-50, really. I mean, maybe the polls are slightly inaccurate, but there has been a huge turnout for lots of Trump rallies right across America.
They have, actually. I mean, I know Nigel Farage was it last night, sort of saying it's like a rock concert.
Yes.
But maybe there's something for British politicians to learn there as well, because our political events tend to be rather staid and rather dull, don't they? I mean, you go to an American one and there is a rock group there, and they're selling burgers and there or whatever, and it's actually a great deal of Trump dancing, yes, which was really quite entertaining. So, but anyway, so you know, I think there, you know, the message that I think we want to send there is that really the suppression of people's opinion, you know, people being condemned or abused for expressing an opinion, even though they are entirely opposed to violence or themselves opposed to oppressing or suppressing anybody else. This is having potentially a major impact, not only on the way that we see elections panning out, but also the conduct of the campaigns themselves, because they're exploiting this. Politicians will exploit this dynamic.
And perhaps it's making views stronger, I think, opposing views to these left-wing.
So it's polarising the situation.
Yeah, it's polarising it, absolutely.
And this is one of the things that we see in the United States at the moment with this election. The United States is highly polarised at the present time politically. And, you know, it's one of the reasons this election is so important, because there's not going to be some little smooth transition that you won't tell the difference in policy in Washington if it's a Trump presidency for another 4 years or if it's Biden. You will see quite a massive shift in policy here. So it's a major game changer potentially. And we'll talk later about how that might affect the United Kingdom and the rest of the rest of the world. But look, we're delighted now to be joined, sorry, at least I didn't spill the water. But we're delighted now to be joined by Caesar and Max. Caesar, correct me if I'm wrong, you are the chairman of the University of Tennessee Conservative Coalition. Maybe you can tell us a little bit. Sorry?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. Outstanding. I'm glad I got that right. And you can tell us a little bit about that in a moment. And Maxwell, I understand you're the Turning Point USA representative there in Tennessee, or for the university? I'm not sure which.
For the University of Tennessee.
What you both do in those roles. Maybe Caesar, you could start.
Certainly. So as chairman of the UTK Conservative Coalition, I help to lead, advise, and most importantly, organize the events for, as of right now, 6 organizations on campus. We strive to increase membership for each organization and to give as many opportunities for the politically interested population on campus as possible. We've seen a lot of success this semester. We just started this semester of this project. However, like I said, it's been rather successful, and we hope to continue to do more work next semester.
We come on to you, Max. Sorry, Max or Maxwell?
It's either one.
Okay, well, maybe I'll alternate between the two. But Caesar, so what you're doing then, really, because for people watching this here in the UK, they might not realise that you don't have a Conservative Party in the United States. You have the Republican Party, which is a Conservative party, but actually there are a lot of Conservative organisations, or at state level, but at federal level as well, and you sort of there's all sorts of things going on under the broad umbrella of Conservative, and within that you've got quite a spectrum, I think, of opinions. And so what you do in the Conservative Coalition is, as the word says, coalition. You bring those people together, and you discuss issues of common issues of interest, and what you think should be done about them. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely. So one of our organizations, one of the largest ones, is College Republicans, but indeed we have other organizations that are not affiliated with any party on campus, like Young Americans for Freedom, which has a lot of chapters around the country. as well as Young Americans for Liberty. And then we also have additional partisan organizations that are affiliated with the Republican Party, like Students for Trump. And we also include anti-abortion advocacy groups like Students for Life and an independent organization that just represents students on this campus, Volunteers for Life. Yeah.
All right, well, Maxwell, so your role is?
Yes, so I'm the vice president of the chapter at University of Tennessee for Turning Point USA. Our main goal is to identify and organize people who believe in the Constitution of the United States, lowering taxes, just trying to get the government out of our life so we can go as we please, more freedom, less restrictions and things like that.
I call libertarian here.
For sure. What's great about Turning Point USA, we're big proponents of free speech. So we'll hold events and people that are more left-leaning will show up so we can have a conversation with them. People who are way more right-leaning than I'm comfortable with will show up and we can have an honest debate about that. So it's rather just a cesspool of people who love this country. And it does bring
the word cesspool, but no, excellent, good.
Oh, so what's the general mood at the moment in Tennessee? Do you think it's going to be a Trump win for Tennessee?
So in Tennessee, this is a pretty red state, and it's pretty clear that Donald Trump will win handily. However, a more interesting race to look at would be the Senate race that's currently going on. Lamar Alexander, the incumbent senator, is resigning his position. He is retiring, and the race is unexpectedly, despite the fact, like I said, it is a red state. It's unexpectedly competitive. Marquita Bradshaw, who is the Democratic candidate, won in an upset in the Democratic primary. She is a very, it would be fair to say, far left progressive.
For sure.
And she, like I said, won in an upset against, I'm blanking on his name, but a more moderate candidate. And Bill Haggerty, who is the Republican candidate, is most likely to win out. And I think that's almost for certain as well. But it'll be interesting to see, in comparison to previous Senate elections, what the margin of a majority will be for Bill Haggerty and the Republican Party. It might very well be lesser than before.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, something here is that you rightly bring up the Senate race, because of course we may, the Senate race is as close, if not closer in some respects, than the presidential race. And I was explaining earlier in the program, I don't know whether you were watching, I don't know, but trying to explain a little bit about how the Senate and the White House have been both Republican up till now. Maybe they will stay that way. We won't know and for a little while yet. But the problem, of course, is when you have a president of one party and you have a Senate of another party, then of course it's difficult for that president to get things done because he's obstructed by the other party. And so I'm just explaining why that to people who might be watching this, who aren't that familiar with the US system, why the Senate race is an important race in terms of even what happens in the White House going forward, and then what the president's able to. I mean, the other thing that I'm interested in, Tennessee is one of those states that had a very high turnout, early turnout of voters. Now, I'm not sure whether you actually exceeded in Tennessee the number of voters who voted in 2016 in total, but you were pretty close to it, if not. What's driving this high early turnout?
Well,
for some viewers who may have missed the beginning or didn't realise this, but in the UK, you have election day, and that's when you cast your vote, and that's it. It's all rich, and we don't have an electoral college, and we don't have any of this sort of stuff. You complicate things terribly over there. But of course, in the US, in many states, you're able to vote days, weeks in advance, as well as by post. So what's driving this early turnout?
So one thing that I've noticed, and in my personal life and others I've talked to, is the amount of private companies that are actually pushing our generation, our age range to vote. I don't know how many times I have opened Netflix or YouTube and seen an advertisement from an obscure company like Levi's Jeans or Wrangler or something like that. And it's an ad of someone putting on their jeans and then going to the voting booth. So I really, really do think it's a lot to do with companies using their influence in their advertisements. And also just the culture is a lot different than 2016. People are excited to vote this election and nervous about the results of said election.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think a lot of people just very simply grasp the implications that this election will have for the future. And like in Florida, just today, they have already exceeded with early voting and absentee balloting their total turnout for 2016. But like I said, the implications for this election are huge, and definitely people want to vote, and it's a really great thing to be seeing. And I hope going forward in the future, this is something that we continue to see.
So what would you guys think would be the three biggest issues for US voters at the minute?
Oh, gosh.
That's a
hard question. Yeah.
I think primarily. The issue of the Supreme Court is at heart. And of course, Amy Coney Barrett has been confirmed to the Supreme Court, replacing Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who unfortunately passed away last month. But I think people grasp the fact that if Joe Biden wins and the Democrats are able to take back the Senate and keep the House, there is a great possibility that they will go forward and pack the court. That is to put more justices on the Supreme Court. If President Trump wins again, sorry.
Well, no, Caesar, go on and talk about President Trump and what he would do or how that would play out in relation to the Supreme Court. But bear in mind that the Supreme Court's also got a say, hasn't it, really, if this is really contested, this election. And also, the Supreme Court in the United States, partly because you have that written constitution of yours, has a more powerful role than our courts here in the UK. So maybe you'd like to say something a bit, because you've quite rightly highlighted that, but some people watching this may not understand quite the relevance of the Supreme Court, why it's important in this case.
Oh, certainly. So let me get to that in a second. But if President Trump wins, there is a great possibility that he might get another Supreme Court nominee or two. There are two justices that a lot of analysts say may retire within the next 4 years. But indeed, in the United Kingdom, the courts don't have such a large power over the influence of both the legislature and the executive. And of course, in the UK, the legislature and the executive are one branch. In the United States, under the process of judicial review, great issues of constitutional importance can be brought before the Supreme Court, and their rule is basically law. Once they decide on a case, that is the law of the land in interpretation with the Constitution. So definitely, if Joe Biden wins and the Democrats move forward to put more justices on the Supreme Court, thereby securing a what's not explicitly Democratic, because there are no partisan justices on the Supreme Court, but in essence, a liberal-leaning majority, there can be a definite sense that there could be an air of partisan bias in the Supreme Court going forward, which could have tremendous impacts on political issues.
Maxwell, I mean, am I correct in saying that actually the president effectively appoints the members of the Supreme Court?
Yes, so the president will select a member, and then the Senate will in fact confirm that member. So it will take both the president, or if Joe Biden wins, he will need the Senate to in fact be more left-leaning with him to confirm those Supreme Court judges.
Definitely, that goes back to the implications of this election. The Senate races, not just in Tennessee, but across this country as well, like in Arizona and in North Carolina. These are races of great importance, because if the Democrats are able to take back the Senate and the White House, and they are able to move forward to put more justices on the Supreme Court, the constitutional status quo of this country can be altered for generations to come.
Absolutely. Yeah, because those people, correct me if I'm wrong, but they also sit there for life, don't they?
Absolutely.
Unless they choose to leave. This is a long-term appointment. It's not got a tenure of a couple of years or something. This is you appoint a 50-year-old, they could be there for the next 30 years.
No, absolutely. And it's interesting, too, with respect to the federalist nature of America, because on the federal level, indeed, all federal judicial appointments, be it Supreme Court or to lower level district courts, are lifetime appointments. But in certain states, especially justices to state Supreme Courts are elected, and they do serve for set terms. So if we want to talk about legitimate judicial reform, this is something that we could try to approach as well from a federal perspective. Instead of putting more justices that would serve for lifetime positions on the Supreme Court, and I'm not saying this is something that I support, but we could be having a more reasonable discussion about, say, implementing term limits for judges.
So as you know, we had our Brexit vote in 2016 and we voted to leave. So what do you think if Trump does win, how will that affect us in the UK? Will that have any implications for our trade deal with the US?
Or indeed a Biden win?
Indeed a Biden win?
I think in broad swaths of foreign policy right now, there is a lot of good that can come from a Donald Trump win, and especially with respect to the United Kingdom. Obviously, the economy of your country hangs in the balance right now, and it is very dependent on the great economies of the world, not just the United States, but of course the European Union as well, in Japan. And your Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has been very successful at negotiating free trade agreements with, like I said, Japan, and trying to get a free trade agreement with the European Union. However, a free trade agreement does hang in the balance with the United States, and it could be a serious boon for the United Kingdom's economy if Donald Trump is elected, because that could secure that agreement. If Joe Biden is elected, I would say that obviously he could try to pursue, and he will probably try to pursue, a free trade agreement. However, I don't know if that'll be as successful. Just seeing Donald Trump's history in foreign policy over the past 4 years, he has been an incredibly successful deal maker, as we both very well know.
Do you think Biden is perhaps more affiliated more with the European Union? Because we did hear Trump say or suggest that he might actually be more affiliated with them rather than
I would say
supporting
that Biden tends to earn himself a more globalist, view than Trump would be rather more nationalist in the sense. So I predict that Joe Biden will probably be more affiliated with the European Union because the view of the Democratic Party is the view of that we're all in this together, like the high political unions, like the EU, things like that, in which Trump has fully supported Brexit, and I'm a huge fan of Brexit simply because it is a single nation in it for the end,
I mean, as you say, it's not just about Biden, it's the Democrat Party as well. And it was Obama as a Democrat president who did ruffle some feathers when he said that if the UK left the European Union, we'd be at the back of the queue for a trade deal. And I think that's still in people's memories here. People were he didn't make too many friends with that comment. And of course that was used by the people who wanted the UK to remain in the UK to remain in the European Union as a reason why we shouldn't leave. So that was a direct interference in that sort of political process. But it's a Democrat position, as you say, whereas Trump has been supportive. He's good mates with somebody we know, Nigel Farage, and really, there's a very different outcome there. And one of the purposes of this discussion, this program today, is for us to be able to identify what the difference would be, or the impacts would be on the United Kingdom, and indeed the rest of the world, of a Biden win versus a Trump win. Because this isn't, most elections, most people in other countries will say, well, it's up to them. What happens over there happens over there. It might, whether it's Japan or whether it's the United States or wherever it might be. But of course, in this case, the United States is such a powerful, an influential country that it does have an impact. And if there is that sort of comment coming out of the White House, such as Obama came out with in the future, and it might have something to do with all sorts of, it could be something to do with immigration, it could be something to do with another future conflict that we don't know anything about, it could be all sorts of things that rise. But of course, what's happened in the United States over the past 4 years is that the Democrats and the Republicans have become incredibly polarized. That's how I see it. Anyway, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that has a massive impact on the rest of us, particularly the UK now trying to emerge as an independent nation free of the European Union and having to succeed, and it's going to need friends.
Absolutely. Polarization, I think, is another driver for turnout in this election. It's a driver of enthusiasm across the world. I don't know if you saw on Twitter today, but Donald Trump posted a video from Nigeria of protesters that were rallying in support of his campaign at their local Baptist church. And that's really incredible. But indeed, it's also kind of a sad state of affairs that no matter what country you live in, you have an opinion on this election. Mm-hmm. And it's because, unfortunately, or maybe for better, this election has so many implications for countries around the world, and the United Kingdom especially. Indeed, Brexit is a huge issue right now, and the economy of the United Kingdom stands at a precipice. And the United States could be a great ally for the United Kingdom in an economic sense going forward, but it all depends on which president we elect.
And I mean, we were talking earlier about Black Lives Matter. We didn't touch on Antifa and so on, but with the previous guest, Robert Olds. And of course, the US has seen that in a major way. Would a Biden win encourage those movements, do you think?
Well, that's difficult. Joe Biden is the author of the crime bill that the Black Lives Matter movement is totally against for. So it's really a peculiar situation where the main proponent, because of course the Black Lives Matter organization, not the movement, but the organization's a full Marxist group. So of course you would think they would vote for someone who's more left-leaning. But the person that they're putting forward for the left-leaning candidate is the person who's in charge of the problems that they are saying that are problems. So it really is a funny situation that we have here. But again, even Trump says he's done more for Black people than any other president besides Abraham Lincoln. And Lincoln is the one who, freed slaves. So it is a very peculiar situation because it's hard because the movement is different than the organization and the organization is different than the movement, which creates so many problems when you're trying to talk about these things.
It's a political movement too now, isn't it? So it's not just really about a single message, it's become much more than that. Right.
And what makes it hard is when you say the words Black Lives Matter, any rational human being would say, yes, we're all born equally under a creator, given the same rights. But then the movement says something more than, or the organization is more than that, and has created a narrative that is more than just equality under the law. And that's what makes it a difficult situation.
Absolutely. It's unfortunately, an inherently political movement as of right now. And indeed, if Joe Biden wins, obviously I would suppose that the Black Lives Matter movement and organization respectively will take a lot of validation from that. And they will obviously boost their membership, both in enthusiasm and in actual numbers. It will be a Biden win will be very successful for them. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much, guys.
Well, look, Caesar, Maxwell, it's been a pleasure. We could probably carry on this conversation. I'd like to get onto national security. I'd like to get onto, develop this conversation, this bit of it to law enforcement. But I think we're going to have to move on. But look, thank you very much for joining us. It's a pleasure. And hope to have you on a future conversation again.
All right. Thank you very much.
Guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers. Take care.
Interesting.
It was, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think?
Well, it seems to me they think it's going to be quite a tight vote there in Tennessee.
Yes, I mean, Tennessee is a red state, but we've got the polling situation, haven't we? We don't really know. It's all down to the final wire. I think it's also interesting. They didn't really know. They weren't quite sure what the early turnout actually meant.
Yeah.
Is that in favour of the Democrats and Biden, or is it in favour of Trump, or actually is this early turnout, as Caesar was saying, really just due to an enthusiasm that's come about as a result of the polarisation and
So
people
as
feeling
a
strongly about
British
this?
voter, I don't really understand why you would do that. Why would you not just vote on the day?
Well, I mean, maybe because it's the numbers, and one of the things that has been a problem early on in this campaign was that a lot of the states closed polling stations. They had fewer polling stations.
Oh, really?
And so people
But
had
why
to
did they close polling stations?
Well, that was part of the debate. I mean, because they tended to, I think, to be, they were both, if it was a Democrat state that closed them, then the Republicans were saying, well, they're trying to make it difficult for Republican voters. And in Republican states, because of course every state has its state government, they were, and legislature, so they were accused of closing polling stations because they were acting against the Democrats. So, I mean, who knows? And this is the thing. And it was interesting there that neither Caesar nor Maxwell seemed to be quite sure whether that's got something to do with it. So I guess we'll have to see on that.
Yeah.
I think also, what he was saying about Nigeria, and in fact, a lot of people won't know this, but there's been some people in other parts of the world who were raising money and campaigning for Brexit, and they weren't allowed to obviously contribute to Brexit, but there were groups of people in Africa who were busy supporting some of the campaigning that I was involved in when I was involved in party politics. And for nations like...
Perfectly legally.
Perfectly, entirely, and not a penny actually came to the UK in any way. But it's interesting, the point being, as they were saying, in Nigeria, there are people who have been campaigning in support of Trump to let the Americans know that they would like a Trump win. So that's, this is an election that is going to have reverberations around the world. And that's,
Absolutely, yes.
That's massively significant.
And particularly for us, I think, because Trump he's so pro-Britain, isn't he? He really is.
He is. I mean,
And
we did see it translated.
Is Biden so pro-British?
Well,
or is he more of a globalist?
He said nothing, has he?
Yeah.
I mean, Trump has been there, sort of, geeing it all up. He was quite passionately of public opinion that we should leave the European Union, and indeed we have. But Biden has said nothing. And
Kept very quiet.
He has, and I think he knows that will be an unpopular move. And it'll certainly be an unpopular international move as far as we're concerned. Perhaps not Brussels, but I think, the message here is that there are depths to this campaign that actually we in the UK don't really, it's difficult for us to understand. The electoral college system, the differences between the parties, the effect of the state governments having the ability to legislate over how they run the election in their places, how many polling stations they have and how early people can vote and all the rest of it. It's a very different election to the ones we hold, and yet its implications are going to be potentially massive for us as we emerge on the world.
Particularly post-Brexit, I think.
Anyway, that be as it may, that was an interesting conversation with two young people. And then, bear in mind that these are students who are passionately right of centre, who believe powerfully that Donald Trump should win the election, who believe it's the best option for the United States, the best option for the UK and perhaps for the rest of the world, with some caveats, of course. But these are young people who are busy working to build a coalition of conservative thinking people, so that's broad across the whole conservative spectrum, in universities and colleges and campuses across the United States. And Caesar didn't mention it, but the University of Tennessee Conservative Coalition has 900 student members. How many universities in the United Kingdom could boast having even half of that number of people involved in a political movement which is really just about generating thinking and ideas? Absolutely none. It's an incredible thing, and I think if it's not too partisan, then perhaps it's something that people should be encouraged to think about here. But anyway, we're now very pleased to be joined by David Maddox. David Maddox is the political editor of the Sunday Express. He's been covering it, and I think was even at one point wondering whether he would be going out to the United States to cover this election. David, good evening. How are you?
Hi, Henry. Yeah, good. Thanks. Hi, Joe. Good to see you both.
You were doing this might be doing it from your phone earlier on when we were organising this. I thought you might be in the pub. I'm glad you're not, because I'm not.
No. Well, sadly, yes, you're right. I was supposed to be in Washington, but all the COVID stuff really kind of got in the way of that. Actually, looking at the way the city's been boarded up at the moment, I think I'm quite glad I'm not there, actually, to be honest. It might be better to go time.
Indeed. I mean, actually, people may not have seen the news, but Washington, particularly in the area around the White House and so on, has been fortified, basically, hasn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, quite a large area in Washington. I was quite surprised. I recognised one of the streets as the one I stayed in last time, and that's that's a good half an hour drive to the White House from there, and it's I mean, it's totally fortified, totally boarded up, and the whole lot. It's amazing.
I mean, maybe before we talk about your take on the election in general, and the polling that you've been, I think, involved with in some way, but this boarding up of all these shops and premises around the key areas in Washington DC, I mean, is this really, do you think, a precaution that is being taken because people genuinely believe that there might be violence as a result of the outcome? And do you think whichever outcome it is, whether it's Trump win or a Biden win, the risk might be the same? Or do you think that this is a bit of theatre, so people are talking up the issues around the election by doing this boarding up? I mean, it's difficult to tell from the UK.
I can only kind of go on the word of people I know over there, and they're genuinely worried. And I think, frankly, they're more worried about what the left will do, or the supporters of Biden will do, and the BLM lot will do if Trump wins. But quite frankly, some of the Trump supporters as well probably would worry them as well. But I mean, let's be honest. The most likely we're going to get mass protests is if Trump wins.
But is this level of the fear of the violence, is this an unprecedented thing, or does this happen every US election?
I would say this is unprecedented. I mean, I was over in Chicago 12 years ago for the first Obama election, and there wasn't any expectation of that, even though it was fairly, at the time, hotly contested election. Obama ended up winning quite easily, but it was. I can't think of another example of this. I mean, you don't see it in this country. We had a hotly contested election and a fairly divisive election in December, but we didn't have any streets being boarded up around here. But I mean, this whole year has seen protests and parts of America, frankly, burning. Let's be honest. I mean, you look at places like Portland and Minnesota and places like that. It's been devastating. I mean, unfortunately, our broadcast media have largely failed to show that side of things. But that's the main reason I believe actually that, and certainly our polling over the last few months has suggested from America that Trump is even in this race. I think he kind of lost it from the coronavirus point of view, and then suddenly Black Lives Matter came into it. The whole law and order agenda came straight onto the top of the political agenda, really, and it was and Trump's found his zing ever since.
If you mentioned your polling, we'll come back to law and order in a minute, maybe. But
Yeah.
you mentioned the polling. And now, at the beginning of the programme, I sort of did an explanation for people on what the Electoral College is, just sort of wave top issues, and talked about how that plays out in the States a little bit. But the sort of poll of polls, if you like, the average polling across the conventional polling sort of companies and agencies has really fairly consistently shown, up until recently, which is, I think it's shown a little bit of a shifting recently, has really fairly consistently shown Biden and the Democrats ahead. But
Yeah.
you've seen polling that shows something different.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I'm a bit of a polling skeptic. I'm going to say this straight off. I mean, I've done enough in this country. I've seen enough different polls. I mean, I think of 2017 in particular, but I mean, there have been other examples where polling companies have been all over the place. And the best, I think there's only one poll that matters. It's the vote on the day. We all know that. I mean, we all remember Brexit. The polling companies didn't pick that up at all, the referendum vote, but I mean, those of us who had been kind of working on the ground as such knew it was coming, but the polling companies didn't pick it up. Now, you should be even more skeptical of polling companies in America, because polling companies in America are largely connected to a party and largely partisan. And the way they weight polls, I mean, a lot of those polls which gave Biden a 14-point lead, for example, we're +9 weighted in favour of the Democrats. So, shock horror, Biden has a big lead. I mean, that's, it's not a surprise. So, they were completely wrong in 2016, most of the American polls. Now, the polling company, well, it's not a polling company, the think tank we've been working with, the Democracy Institute, it is a right-wing think tank, true, but it is party politically independent. It isn't connected to the Republican Party or any other party for that matter. And it has a history of being right. Certainly, the polling work it did for its clients in Britain for a EU referendum got the Brexit result almost bang on. And the polling work it did for its clients, which didn't publish, unfortunately, for the last US presidential election, it was pretty close, and it's one of the few to predict the Electoral College victory. So, I got to know Patrick Basham, who's a director, on almost this time last year when I was over in Washington for a conference, and we've done some things together story-wise. And kind of just before lockdown, he approached me and said, "Look, we're doing this polling again. We've never thought about publishing it before, but would the Sunday Express like to publish it?" And never look a gift horse in the mouth. So, yes, please, thank you. And but it's worked out much better than we thought. I mean, and it's been the outlier. So we consistently had in the popular vote either Trump slightly ahead, no more than 3 points. The last one was 48-47, or dead level, and always winning the Electoral College vote, because the way Republican votes are more spread across the country. For example, a lot of the Democrat votes are in California and New York, and they can heap up votes there, but they still get the same number of Electoral College votes. And Republicans are more evenly spread. So, Trump has always won, and we've always been the outlier. And the reason for that is that Patrick only counts like people who identify as likely voters, because in the US they have a historically low turnout. Generally, it's usually around 50 odd percent. It looks like it's going to be 65% this time round. And so, he doesn't just go for people who are registered to vote, but have no real intention of voting. He goes for likely voters, and amongst likely voters, Trump wins. And more than that, he goes for the shy Trump vote because, we've seen this with Brexit in this country and various parties that we've been associated with in this country. Sometimes the general media picture, let's say, makes an entity, a candidate or a party so toxic that people don't want to admit to their friends and family, or let alone pollsters, that they're supporting this person or this party. And the shy Trump vote is massive. Like 80% of Trump supporters will, and this has been consistent. It was certainly true in our last one, but it's been consistent. Between 70 and 80% of Trump supporters are shy voters who will not admit it to their friends and family. So,
it's interesting.
This is what our poll is picking up. So.
It was interesting, David, because we've talked about that with previous guests from the University of Tennessee and with Robert Olds from the Bruges Group, and this the problem of sort of people who are right of centre who've got some concerns, even if they're very moderate concerns about the way immigration is being managed, or are concerned about law enforcement or policing or so, and they've been exposed to, either directly or indirectly, to such levels of abuse and insulting behaviour that they don't want to talk about politics. They don't want to express their views. They don't want to discuss things. They don't want to exchange their ideas, and they are not going to tell anybody. Yes, that we've experienced, but in the United States, it would seem to be a major issue as well.
It's what Reagan called the silent majority. And, they don't make a fuss. They're not the ones out there burning buildings and protesting and tearing down statues and screaming on Twitter and doing odd YouTube videos and things. They are just getting on with their lives.
On YouTube?
Yes, well, indeed, yes, indeed, yes. This is a fine exception to the rule, I should say.
Thank you very much, David. Well said.
And, they're just getting on with their lives. And we saw this with Brexit. It was the Remainers who were out there screaming and protesting and demonstrating, but every single time it came to an election or a vote, the pro-Brexit position won handsomely every single time.
Notoriously unreliable, I think.
Yeah, and this is of course why none of our polling companies really saw the red wall seats coming, because partly because people probably don't in that set probably don't think of asking working class Northerners what they think about life. It's much easier to talk about the kind of West London liberal elite, and and I'm afraid to say that the Washington, New York, Los Angeles dynamic is quite similar. States.
We're talking about similarities here, but but what do you think the differences are going to be between a Trump win and a Biden win, as far as we in the UK are concerned? Difference? Do you think we're going to anything palpable will change?
I can't get out of my mind that Biden was the vice president of Barack Obama, who came over here to tell us that we'd be back of the queue. The Democrats like big bureaucracies. They don't like democracies very much. They're much more comfortable with China than Republicans are, which is a concern, incidentally. And they are much more comfortable with the European Union than they are with Britain. And they also now think that Brexit gave them Trump. So, there is a thinking amongst some Democrats, not all, but some Democrats that, a bit of a punishment agenda, dare I say it. There's also the Irish Democrat issue. And, it's it's not so long ago that, fundraisers for the IRA were being held in New York and Chicago. Let's not forget that. And they're very powerful. And if Ireland kicks up a fuss about, let's say, the internal market bill, and says that the Northern Ireland Agreement is being, even if it's not, I mean, it's nonsense. But if they're saying the Northern Ireland Agreement is being taken apart by the British, then the Democrats will, or certainly a large portion of the Democrats will, vote against a trade deal. That said, I know Liz Truss. I interviewed Liz Truss just ahead of a Conservative virtual conference, as it was. I know that she's been working hard on the US trade deal, and she's been working hard talking to both sides. And, we mustn't forget that the British-American relationship is key for them as well as it is for us. It is really underpins the Anglosphere, the whole kind of global security. Whoever's going to be president is going to have a problem with China, and going to have a problem with Putin. And put conspiracy theories aside, they're going to have to work with the British to deal with that through NATO, through the Five Eyes. So that relationship, we will have a strong relationship, whoever wins. But let's be in no doubt that it will be a lot easier with Trump. And I mean, and also Trump is half British. I mean, his mother was Scottish, and he does feel that side of him. He is very pro-British.
I mean, just summing up that bit, you feel that in terms of the American relationship with the United Kingdom, that as we are emerging out of the transition period, and we've got enough challenges already with COVID and the impact on the economy, not just our economy, of course, but at a time when we need to be fighting fit and actually we need to be moving forward quite powerfully, we're going to need friends to do that. And if we've got a Democrat Biden in the White House, that may be tricky. Or less, it's going to be less easy than it would be with a red Republican Trump back in there for another 4 years. But the other thing is, what about the Senate?
Yes, indeed. I think the Senate is more important for domestic policy in America, and certainly, if let's say Biden wins a presidency, the only way that they stop him from packing the Supreme Court with liberal judges is by the Republicans holding on to the Senate. So there's going to be a lot of problems there, and the Senate really comes into play in terms of the balance of powers in the US. Everything has to go through Congress, both the House of Representatives and the Senate, and I don't think Republicans are going to get the House of Representatives back, which is the lower house, but they could hold on to the Senate, and we have a lot of allies there. I think of people like Senator Ted Cruz and people like that who, and there's quite a few I've interviewed over the last year who are very keen in the Senate of pushing forward this UK-US trade deal, because the key thing about it is, and what nobody ever talks about, is that the two great financial centres of the world, all the money flow goes through London and New York. And if you link those two together, you have an extremely powerful hub, essentially, through which all trade will flow, and all free trade will find its path to the UK-US relationship. And it's key for everything.
I mean, and also talk about China. This is a particular bugbear of mine. We've got the governments of Western Europe, of Europe, and North America, all the world really, all worried about coronavirus and COVID. Their bandwidth seems to be fully taken up, particularly here in the UK, with worrying about what they're doing with COVID. In the meantime, there are other things going on in the world, and the only person who seems to be watching the Chinese ball is Donald Trump. Many people won't have realised that next year the first operational deployment of the Queen Elizabeth aircraft carrier strike group is to the China Sea region, to
Yeah.
that part of the world. The only real military threat in that part of the world is China. China is pushing hard in terms of land grabs, artificial islands in the South China Sea. It's threatening Taiwan. It's confronting India in Kashmir, with fatal consequences for a number of Indian soldiers. And there's the issue of the soft power expansion, buying up vast tracts of sort of mineral resources in Africa, the 5G issue here. China is, it's my view, is not a benign entity. And the only person who seems to have his eye on that ball is Donald Trump to an extent. You know, what would happen, you brought this up, you touched on it, but what would happen in terms of global security and the balance of power generally, do you think, if we had a Biden president?
Well, that's a big question mark, because he's not answered that question throughout this campaign. And you know, the evidence is, and we've seen with the Hunter Biden issues, his son, you know, the cozying up to China. I mean, Biden himself, Joe Biden himself, was responsible for the last deal with China. It's, you know, it's footage of him, you know, toasting deals with the Chinese premier. You know, it's he has a very cozy relationship with China. Now, in different times, that may be a good thing, but you're right, China is not a benign entity. It is a very dangerous one. There are a whole load of issues. You mentioned the buying up of mineral resources in Africa on the cheap, but you look at energy as well. I mean, the push to build nuclear power plants in the world, which could start here in the UK. You know, we need to be taking that on, and we need to be looking at energy production, nuclear production in particular, like we look at defence production. You know, we don't outsource it to other people. We ring fence it and protect it, and the UK and the US need to be doing that. And I know talks are ongoing with that behind the scenes, but that depends on a Trump presidency. That won't happen with a Biden presidency. And if China has its finger on the button for power around the world, literally turning off the lights around the world, then, you know, that's Chinese power locked in for 80 years. And it's a very serious matter indeed.
Do the Democrats have more of a globalist agenda, would you say?
Totally, yes. Yes. Yeah, in the sense, and that's what I meant about them liking big bureaucracies and corporates more than the Republicans do. They're not as great on individual rights as the Republicans, never have been. And to a certain degree, countries which are run by big bureaucracies or entities, so like the Chinese and differently the European Union, I should say, the European Union aren't the same as the Chinese, but they are similar in the sort of ways that they are run, and the sort of really, I mean, the lack of respect for democratic votes. And we've seen it with our own referendum with the EU, and the way they treated that with contempt. And I mean, just the way, I think of a financial crisis, the way they removed governments and imposed bureaucratic governments. Like my wife comes from Italy. You know, you look at what happened to Italy. They just removed the Italian government and put some bureaucrats in charge. So there is, you know, within the Democrats, there is a much more comfortable feeling with that sort of thing. And certainly Trump republicanism, if you like, is very much against that sort of thing. It's very much kind of breaking down those vested interests and, you know, looking at nation to nation deals and really, you know, much more interested in the nation state.
I mean, you haven't said whether you've got a horse in this race, but have you put any money on anybody? It's not too late. I keep on looking at the odds for Trump, and yeah, it's pretty close to the line.
and the electoral. I should say, last time I looked, the electoral college breakdown of our last poll, which I think is quite realistic, and you know, this time tomorrow it might prove to be horribly wrong, was I think at 6-1 at William Hill, and I thought that was quite a nice bet. But so I'm I'm certainly thinking of having a flutter before the night is out.
Well, I'm not going to let you go just yet, David, to go and place that bet. So, but it won't be long. But you mentioned that there's still some time left, and indeed we may not know the outcome of this election for a little while. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? And I mean, we've got postal votes that still have to come in. We've got a postal system that is being, it may well be overwhelmed by this challenge of getting these postal votes in. We've got states that legislate for their own method of doing this to an extent.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a bit of a mess.
It's always been a mess. Remember the hanging chads in Florida, which got Bush elected.
Just one state.
Yeah, exactly. And it's always been a mess in the US. And I'll tell you what, the mail-in votes, the postal votes, is going to be a big problem. I wrote a piece for Steve Bannon's organisation, National Pulse, talking about the postal vote fraud which has gone on in this country, mainly from Labour and the left, and has been, people have been found guilty of it and still managed to get senior jobs in the Labour Party afterwards, which I always find very odd. But, these things make a difference. The harvesting of postal votes makes a difference. And actually that is the nightmare scenario, is that Trump is the clear winner tonight. But then when the postal votes have been counted, certainly in Pennsylvania, which is going to be the key state in all this.
I'll ask you what states, we'll come to that in a minute, what states people should look out for
But
tonight.
Pennsylvania, which is, I think, they've been given, I forgot, is it an extra week or 13 days, something mad like
Something
that.
like that, yeah.
And the postal votes come in, and then suddenly, magically, a load of postal votes give it to Biden. I think at that point, you're going to be seeing legal challenges to the whole thing. The appointment of Amy Coney Barrett as a Supreme Court justice will come into play at that point. And you will see both sides not accepting the result, even after a ruling by the courts. And that, of course, is when boarded up windows in Washington really comes to play, because I think you'll see some quite serious stuff. Yeah.
Indeed. Well, so you've still not said who you think is going to win, but we'll maybe leave it at that.
No, I'm quite happy to say I think my gut feeling, and I'm going to go with our poll, I think Trump's going to win.
Okay, all right, good. Well, we will see. Well, but when we'll see, I don't know, but we will see.
Yes, I'm putting my fingers crossed. Maybe it's wishful thinking.
Well, perhaps the world doesn't need a lurch to the left at this particular moment in time, and a change a sea change. But we will see. That I'm sure there's people out there who would think it needs exactly that. Yeah. But look, David, thank you so much for joining us.
Always
been a pleasure. One of these days, then hopefully it'll be in more convivial surroundings with a pint of beer in front of us. But no, look, it's super to see you again, and thank you very much for joining us.
Yes, thank you, David.
Not a problem. Thanks, Thanks, Henry. All right, bye.
Cheerio, bye-bye. So, David Maddox from the Sunday Express, the political editor of the Sunday Express, a man who's been deeply involved in monitoring the elections in the United States and here, and in fact in other countries for a number of years. And the Sunday Express have, as David was saying, been working with the Democracy Institute in the United States, think tank there, to develop polling. And with the big difference being that they ask people, are you intending to vote, before asking them anything else? Whereas the other polling companies and agencies tend to just simply say, well, you're a registered voter, who do you want to win? And they don't ask the question, are you intending to vote? And when you've only got a turnout, as David was saying there, of some 60-65%, which is higher than normal, around about 50% for a US election, when you've only got 60-65% turning out, then of course there's about 35 or 40% of registered voters who might be rung up by polling companies to ask who are you going to vote for, and they're not intending to vote, and they're not going to vote. So interesting that. What the implications, again, will be, it's going to be a close run race, I think.
Yeah, I think everyone tonight of the opinion that the polls are pretty inaccurate.
Yes. So everything we've talked about is really up in the air, and none of us got a clue. So that's
Well, yeah, if social media is anything to go by, I think Trump seems to be doing quite well, but who
I think
knows?
Trump's, I think Trump's looking at the news, looking at the polling, looking at social media comment, and I do try to look at social media from across the political spectrum, not just from a particular bubble. But it's of course difficult to do sometimes. But it does seem, and indeed the polling, the poll of polls, the average polling across the US, is actually showing in the last few days a slight boost for Trump. But again, tremendously interesting what David was saying about the fact that we've got some states. I think Wisconsin they've got about 4 days before the postal votes have to be in. Pennsylvania, 10 days or a couple of weeks or something. And so you could have, at the moment, the voting as a result of the votes cast in person in some of these states may show, for example, a Trump win. But then, in a couple of weeks, we may actually, when we've got all the postal votes accrued, we might see a Trump lose. And what's happened to those postal votes in the meantime? It's...
Yeah. Will the people accept a Trump win or a Biden win?
Exactly. And there's plenty of opportunity there for, should we call it propaganda, for either side to exploit that question.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. It rather goes back to what Robert was saying. Earlier about
all these boarded up windows.
Yeah, and the boarded up windows. So I think what we're looking at really is we're looking at an election that is too close to call. The electoral college system makes it quite complicated to actually assess and to understand, and the implications, both in the United States, potentially in terms of public unrest in the capital, Washington D.C., hence the boarding up. And half a mile from the White House, that's a long old way. I've spent 3 months in Washington, and when you're half an hour's drive out from the White House, you're quite a long way out. That's a lot of property that's being protected. So we're seeing potentially huge implications for the US in terms of social unrest, public unrest.
And unprecedented as well.
Unprecedented.
And
I think
how much has it been spurred on by Antifa and these far left groups?
That's a question, and we don't really know, except we do know that they've been behind a lot of the rioting that's already taken place. So how will they respond to a Trump win? And again, as was being said, really, the money is on. If there is violence, it's going to be as a result of a Trump win, and it's going to perhaps be caused by people more on the left of politics who are very dissatisfied that their man has not got through. So we've got implications for the US. We didn't touch on healthcare. We didn't really touch on employment or the economy. And there is no doubting that Trump, certainly until the COVID crisis, was doing great things for the US economy and employment. He turned them around quite dramatically. The thing is, with the polarization that's come, we don't really know how the Democrats would behave, what policies they would implement. Because, as David was saying, one of the problems with Joe Biden, in terms of understanding the man and his politics, is that he's not told anybody what he's going to do, what he wants to do. So in any case, major implications for the United States, important implications for us here in the UK, no?
Oh, definitely, absolutely. Particularly post-Brexit, and particularly with Biden's supposed globalist agenda. Yeah, I think it's vital, really. I mean.
Yeah, so massive implications for us. We've heard that people in Nigeria think there are going to be massive implications for them in Nigeria. And I'm sure Beijing and Moscow and others are watching this election very closely as well, because the difference in profile and posture between a Trump United States and a Biden United States, one thinking about maintaining a powerful national economy and presence in the world, and the other more globalist. Of course, the profile of those two different things is going to have major implications in terms of global security and a response to China, as we talked about. So I think that rather sums it up. I mean, I don't know, doesn't it?
I think so.
Yeah, so really none of us know where we even David had to be pushed a little bit to, as to who he was going to back. I knew who he was going to back, really. But So anyway, I think that's where we are. It's going to be a fascinating night. I would, just off the cuff, I would think, states to look out for as you see the results coming in are Pennsylvania, as we talked about, Florida. Florida's got quite a lot, I think 23 electoral college votes. It was leaning towards the Republicans, a Donald Trump win. We've got Georgia, the same. Donald Trump has been pushing hard in Georgia. We've got those northeastern states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and so on. They were light blue. Poll of polls shows them going to Biden. However, recently seem to have been shifting slightly towards Trump, and indeed, the polling that David Maddox was talking about from the Democracy Institute tends to show that those northwestern states may well actually go to Trump. In which case, we're seeing a Trump win. But it's going to be close. It's going to be all out there, and we may not know the results, as we said, for some days to come. But it's going to be an interesting few days or weeks. So, on that note, thank you very much for joining us. Before we go, I'm going to ask you, please, to subscribe to us on the YouTube channel that you're watching now. Please like the video, presuming you did like it and found it vaguely useful. Feel free to leave comments. That's good feedback for us because, in future such programs. Also, we'd be very grateful if you would subscribe on the website, which is www.BRITPAC, BRITPAC.UK. And if you could also follow us on @BRITPAC_UK on Twitter, that would also be very kind of you. Thank you very much. And
thank you, everyone.
We'll see you again.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.